The restaurant was too warm, or maybe it was just me. Le Bernardin had always been our special occasion place. Anniversaries, birthdays, promotions. Tonight, it would be the setting for our last act as a married couple. I adjusted the collar of my black dress, the one Daniel had always said made me look sophisticated. I'd chosen it deliberately, armor for the evening ahead. My attorney, Vivian, had advised against this whole arrangement, signing divorce papers during a family dinner, but I'd insisted. After 15 years of marriage, I wanted closure with witnesses, wanted our families to see us end things with the same dignity we'd maintained throughout our separation. At least, that had been the plan. Elena. My mother's voice pulled me from my thoughts as she slid into the seat beside me. You look exhausted, sweetheart. Thanks, Mom. Just what every woman wants to hear. I tried to smile, but it felt stiff on my face. She patted my hand. You know what I mean. Are you sure about this arrangement? It seems unnecessarily theatrical. It's not theater. It's closure, I said, repeating the phrase my therapist had coached me on. And it was Daniel's idea to have everyone here. He thought it would show that we can still be civil, still be family in some way. My mother pursed her lips, but said nothing more as Daniel's parents entered the private dining room. George and Martha Hamilton, still elegant in their 70s, still looking at me with the same mixture of affection and assessment they'd had since Daniel first brought me home 20 years ago. Elena, darling. Martha air-kissed my cheeks, her Chanel No. 5 enveloping me in a cloud of memories. You look lovely. Thank you, Martha. I gestured to the table. Please, have a seat. George nodded at me, his silver hair catching the light. How are you holding up? I'm fine, George, really. The lie came easily after months of practice. My father arrived next, alone since my parents' own divorce 12 years ago. He embraced me tightly, whispering, You don't have to do this. You know? I know, Dad, but I want to. My younger sister Nora swept in with her husband Todd, both offering sympathetic smiles. Then came Daniel's brother Michael and his wife Stephanie. The room filled with the awkward energy of people who knew they were attending something between a wake and a celebration, but weren't sure how to behave. And then, as if the universe had choreographed his entrance for maximum impact, Daniel walked in. At 45, he still turned heads. His dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, and he'd lost weight since moving out 6 months ago. The navy Tom Ford suit was new. Something I would have once known about in advance would have helped him select. Now, he was a stranger wearing expensive clothes I hadn't chosen. Sorry I'm late, he announced to the room, but his eyes found mine. Traffic was terrible. I nodded, feeling the weight of Vivian's manila folder on the table beside me. Inside were the papers that would legally end our marriage, the culmination of months of negotiations over property, finances, and the remnants of our intertwined lives. No problem, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We were just getting settled. Daniel took the seat across from me, the precise middle of the table, ensuring that all eyes would toggle between us like spectators at a tennis match. I ordered champagne, he said. I hope that's okay with everyone. My mother frowned. Is champagne appropriate for a divorce dinner? Daniel's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We're celebrating new beginnings, Judith, not endings. The waiter arrived with 2 bottles of Dom Perignon, Daniel's standard special occasion choice. As glasses were poured and distributed, I couldn't help but notice Daniel checking his phone. Under the table. A small, unconscious habit I'd once found endearing, the brilliant corporate attorney always in demand. Now, it just reminded me of all the nights I'd slept alone while he handled urgent client matters. A toast, Daniel said, raising his glass after everyone was served. To amicable partings and the courage to pursue happiness, wherever it may lead us. The words stuck in my chest like thorns. Amicable. As if finding lipstick on his collar, 18 months ago had been amicable, as if discovering the hotel receipts had been amicable, as if his confession, it didn't mean anything, Elena, it was just physical, had been amicable. But I raised my glass anyway, because I'd promised myself I wouldn't make a scene. This dinner was my idea as much as his, my chance to show everyone, including myself, that Elena Hamilton, soon to be Elena Mercer again, was not broken by the end of her marriage. To new beginnings, I echoed, taking a sip of the champagne. I couldn't taste. Conversation flowed around me as appetizers were ordered. I watched Daniel charm our families as he always had, telling a story about a difficult client that had everyone laughing. I'd once been spellbound by that same charm, had once believed it was reserved just for me. So, Daniel's father broke in during a lull, never one to avoid uncomfortable topics. What happens after tonight? You two selling the brownstone? Daniel glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. We'd agreed I would keep the house in the settlement, but we hadn't told our families the details yet. Actually, I said, I'm keeping it. I've already moved my design studio into the 3rd floor, and it makes sense for my business. Oh, Martha looked surprised. But it's so large. For just one person, dear. I took another sip of champagne to buy time. It's not just about living space. My interior design business is growing, and having a showroom in a historic Brooklyn brownstone is perfect for my client base. Elena's work has really taken off, Daniel added, and I was surprised by the note of genuine pride in his voice. The brownstone is worth more to her business than it would be as a liquid asset for either of us. That's generous of you, son, George said, sounding impressed. It wasn't generosity, it was guilt. The brownstone had been my dream, and I'd spent 3 years renovating it while Daniel worked 100-hour weeks. He'd barely noticed the transformed spaces until clients and friends began complimenting my work, which eventually led to my first professional commissions. The house was the foundation of my second career, launched at 40 when I realized that being Mrs. Daniel Hamilton wasn't enough to fill my days or my sense of purpose. It's a fair settlement, I said simply. Vivian cleared her throat beside me. Actually, if everyone's comfortable, we could handle the paperwork portion of the evening before the main course, just to get it out of the way. I nodded, grateful for her practical approach. She opened the folder and slid the documents toward me, then a duplicate set toward Daniel. Everything is as we discussed, she said. The division of assets, the brownstone transfer, investment accounts. All that's needed are your signatures, witnessed by your families. Daniel's phone buzzed again, and he glanced down at it, his expression changing subtly. A slight widening of the eyes, a momentary tension around his mouth that most people wouldn't notice. But I'd studied that face for 15 years. Something had surprised him. Is everything all right? I asked. Fine, he said quickly, putting the phone face down on the table. Just work. I knew he was lying. After years of suspicion and eventual confirmation of his infidelities, I'd developed a sixth sense for Daniel's deceptions. But it wasn't my problem anymore. That was the whole point of tonight. I picked up the pen Vivian offered and began signing. In the flagged locations, property settlement, investment division, retirement accounts. Each signature severing another connection to the life we'd built together. When I reached the final page, I paused, my pen hovering over the line that would legally end our marriage. 15 years, 3 miscarriages, countless dinner parties, vacations, holidays, fights, reconciliations, and quiet Sunday mornings reading the Times in companionable silence, all reduced to a signature on a legal document. Elena? Daniel's voice was gentle. You okay? I looked up and met his eyes. There was concern there, maybe even a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with in law school, the idealistic public defender who'd wanted to change the world before corporate law and its rewards had changed him instead. Just taking a moment, I said. Daniel nodded, understanding in his expression. For all his flaws, all his betrayals, he knew me. And perhaps that was the cruelest part of divorce, the severing of a connection with the one person who knew your history because they'd lived it alongside you. I signed my name with a flourish, then slid the papers back to Vivian. There, it's done. Daniel took the pen next, his signatures quick and decisive. The corporate attorney, efficient to the end. When he finished, he handed the documents to Y. His own lawyer, a quiet man named Philip, who'd said little throughout the evening. Well then, Daniel said, reaching for his champagne. I suppose this calls for another toast. His phone buzzed again on the table, and this time the screen lit up, visible to everyone nearby. A text notification appeared. Rebecca, I'm pregnant. We need to talk tonight. The table fell silent. I stared at the phone, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears I refused to shed. Rebecca. Of course her name would be Rebecca. Daniel snatched the phone up, but it was too late. Everyone had seen it. Martha let out a small gasp. My father muttered something that sounded like a curse. Nora reached for my hand under the table. Daniel, his father said, voice tight with disappointment. What is the meaning of this? Daniel looked trapped, his eyes darting around the table before settling on me. Elena, I raised my hand, stopping him. Don't. Please. The waiter chose that moment to appear with our appetizers, oblivious to the explosion that had just detonated at our table. He arranged plates with professional flourish, while we sat in stunned silence. Will there be anything else? He asked brightly. No, Daniel and I said in unison. When the waiter left, I carefully placed my napkin on the table and stood. I think I need some air. Elena, wait. Daniel started to rise. Sit down, Daniel. My voice was ice. I believe your girlfriend needs to talk to you tonight, and I need to not be here. Vivian gathered the signed papers quickly. These are executed. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Thank you, I said, then addressed the table. I'm sorry, everyone. Dinner is paid for. Please stay and enjoy it if you can. As I turned to leave, Daniel caught my wrist. It's not what you think. I looked down at his hand, then back to his face. It doesn't matter what I think anymore. That's the point of tonight, remember? I'm not your wife. Who you get pregnant now is none of my business. I pulled away and walked out, spine straight, head high, the weight of their stares on my back. I made it all the way to the street before the first tear fell. The cool September air hit my face as I emerged from the restaurant. I gulped it in, trying to steady myself, trying to process what had just happened. Rebecca. Pregnant. The words pulsed in my head like a migraine. Elena. I turned to see Nora hurrying after me, my coat and purse in her hands. In my rush to escape, I'd left everything behind. Thanks, I murmured as she draped the coat over my shoulders. What an absolute shit show, she said, wrapping an arm around me. And what a complete asshole Daniel is. Despite everything, I found myself defending him. He didn't know the text would come through during dinner. Are you seriously making excuses for him right now? Nora stared at me incredulously. After what just happened? I shook my head, confused by my own reaction. No, I don't know. It's just complicated. It's not complicated. It's perfectly simple. He cheated on you, and now he's gotten some woman pregnant while your divorce isn't even finalized. That's the textbook definition of an asshole. She was right, of course. But 15 years of marriage couldn't be erased by logic or righteous anger. I need to go home, I said. Nora squeezed my shoulder. I'll come with you. Todd can get an Uber back to our place. No, I stepped back. I need to be alone. Really? Are you sure? Because I don't mind. I'm sure, I interrupted firmly. I need time to process this. Reluctantly, Nora nodded. Call me when you get home, okay? And anytime tonight if you need to talk. I will. I hugged her quickly, then turned and walked toward the corner to hail a cab. As I raised my hand, a familiar voice called my name. Daniel jogged up beside me, slightly out of breath. Go away, I said without looking at him. I have nothing to say to you. Elena, please. Just let me explain. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Explain what? That text seemed pretty self-explanatory. It's complicated. That seems to be the theme of the evening. A taxi pulled up to the curb. I reached for the door, but Daniel blocked me. Don't leave like this. I finally looked at him, really looked at him. The man I'd loved for almost half my life. The man who'd held me through 3 miscarriages and the eventual news that I would never carry a child to term. The man who'd been my best friend before he became my worst betrayal. How should I leave, Daniel? With your blessing? With a smile on my face while your girlfriend carries the child I could never give you? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. She's always been kind to me, I acknowledged, even when Daniel wasn't. I think in her way she was trying to make up for his behavior. Did you call her back? I shook my head. Not yet. I'm still figuring out which Hamilton connections I want to maintain. I understand that, Stephanie said. Michael's sister reached out to me last week, said she missed our lunches, wanted to stay in touch. She shrugged. I'm not ready for that yet. After Stephanie left, I wandered through the quiet house, satisfied with how the evening had gone, but feeling the inevitable post-hosting crash. The brownstone seemed particularly empty after hours filled with conversation and laughter. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and called Martha Hamilton. Elena, dear, she answered on the second ring. How lovely to hear from you. Happy Thanksgiving, Martha, I said. I'm sorry I didn't call back earlier. No need to apologize. I understand this is a complex time. Her voice was warm, with none of the awkwardness I'd expected. Did you have a nice day? I did, actually. I hosted a small dinner for friends. I hesitated, then added, It was different, but good. I'm glad to hear that. She paused. We had a rather subdued affair ourselves. George is fighting a cold, and Michael and Daniel were, well, less than festive company. I couldn't help. A small smile at that. I imagined the Hamilton men sulking through Thanksgiving dinner, their usual dominance of family gatherings diminished by recent events. How are you doing, truly? Martha asked. Daniel never tells me anything of substance. I'm doing better than I expected, I said honestly, building a new life, one day at a time. You always were resilient, she said with what sounded like genuine admiration. I want you to know, Elena, that regardless of what happened between you and Daniel, you'll always be family to me. If you ever need anything, or just want to have lunch and catch up, my door is always open. The offer touched me unexpectedly. Thank you, Martha. That means a lot. After we hung up, I sat for a long while in the living room, thinking about family. The one I'd been born into, the one I'd married into, and the one I was creating now through friendship and choice. The lines between them were blurring and shifting, creating a new configuration that felt, if not perfect, at least authentic. December arrived with a flurry of activity. My design business was booming. The feature in Brooklyn Lifestyle had generated several new high-profile clients, including a well-known chef who wanted my help with his new restaurant concept. Between client meetings, design work, and holiday preparations, I barely had time to think about my personal life, which was why Daniel's text message on a Tuesday afternoon caught me so off guard. My father is in the hospital. Heart attack. Mount Sinai. Thought you would want to know. I stared at the phone, my stomach dropping. George Hamilton had always been kind to me, treating me more like a daughter than an in-law. Despite the divorce, despite everything that had happened with Daniel, the news hit me hard. I called Daniel immediately. "How is he?" I asked when he answered. "Stable now," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "It was touch and go last night, but they got him stabilized this morning." "I'm so sorry, Daniel. Is there anything I can do?" He was quiet for a moment. "Actually, yes. Could you come to the hospital? My mother is asking for you. She's not holding up well." The request surprised me. "Of course. I can be there in an hour." "Thank you," he said simply. I canceled my afternoon appointments and headed to Manhattan, my mind swirling with memories of George Hamilton, his booming laugh at family gatherings, his pride in showing me his vegetable garden at their country house, his genuine interest in my design work when others in the family had dismissed it as a hobby. The hospital was a maze of sterile corridors, but I eventually found my way to the cardiac care unit where a nurse directed me to George's room. Outside the door, Daniel stood talking quietly with Michael. Both looked exhausted, their usual polished appearance rumpled from what had clearly been a long night. "Elena," Daniel said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," I said, then, to my own surprise, hugged him briefly. "How is he?" "Sleeping now," Daniel said. "They've got him on several medications to stabilize his heart rhythm. The doctor says the next 24 hours are critical." "And Martha?" "In with him," Michael said, acknowledging me with a nod. "She hasn't left his side since they brought him in." I hesitated, uncertain of the protocol in this situation. Was I supposed to wait outside? Go in? The boundaries of my relationship with the Hamiltons had never been more unclear. Daniel seemed to sense my uncertainty. "You should go in. Mom's been asking for you." I nodded and pushed open the door quietly. The room was dimly lit, machines beeping softly as they monitored George's vital signs. Martha sat beside the bed, her normally perfect appearance disheveled, holding her husband's hand with both of hers. "Martha," I said softly. She looked up, her face crumpling slightly at the sight of me. "Elena, you came." "Of course I did." I moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "How are you holding up?" "Not well," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 52 years we've been married. I can't imagine." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. I pulled a chair beside hers and sat down, taking her free hand in mine. "George is strong, and he has excellent medical care." She nodded, clinging to my hand. "He was complaining about indigestion after dinner. I told him it was just the spicy food we'd had. If I'd known—" "Don't," I interrupted gently. "You couldn't have known. Heart attacks often present that way." We sat in silence for a while, watching George's chest rise and fall, the monitors tracking each beat of his heart. Then Martha spoke again, her voice steadier. "I'm glad you're here. Regardless of what happened with you and Daniel, you're still family to us. To me." The words echoed what she'd said on Thanksgiving, but carried more weight here in this sterile room where mortality hung in the balance. "I know," I said, "and I'm grateful for that." "George always thought of you as the daughter we never had," she continued. "Even even recently he's asked about you, wondered how you were doing." Tears pricked my eyes. "I've always thought of him as a second father." Martha squeezed my hand. "Would you sit with him for a few minutes? I need to use the restroom, but I don't want him to be alone if he wakes up." "Of course." After she left, I moved to the chair she'd vacated beside George's bed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished against the white hospital sheets. I took his hand gently, noting the papery texture of his skin, the prominent veins mapping the back of his hand. "Hey, George," I said softly. It's Elena. You've given everyone quite a scare. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Martha's just stepped out for a moment, but she'll be right back. Daniel and Michael are here too. I stroked his hand. Everyone's pulling for you. His fingers twitched slightly in mine, and I felt a surge of hope. That's it. You just rest and get stronger. We all need you around for a long time yet. The door opened behind me, and I expected to see Martha returning. Instead, it was Daniel, his expression somber. Any change? He asked, moving to stand at the foot of the bed. I shook my head. He moved his hand a little when I spoke to him, but that's all. Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on his father. The doctors say that's good, that he's responsive to voices. Your mother went to the restroom, I explained, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this family moment. I should probably go, give you all some privacy. Please don't, Daniel said quickly. Mom wants you here. And I do too. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since my arrival. The strain of the past hours showed in the lines around his eyes, the slump of his normally perfect posture. Despite everything that had happened between us, my heart ached for him in that moment. Okay, I said. I'll stay a while longer. Martha returned, bringing with her a nurse who needed to check George's vitals. We stepped outside to the corridor. While they worked, You should get some rest, I told Martha. You look exhausted. I can't leave him, she said, her voice breaking. What if... He's stable, Daniel interjected, and you won't do him any good if you collapse from exhaustion. Your son is right, I agreed. Why don't you let me drive? You home for a few hours? You can shower, change clothes, maybe nap a little. Daniel and Michael will call immediately if there's any change. She hesitated, torn between her need to stay by her husband's side and the obvious physical toll the night had taken. A few hours, she finally conceded, just to freshen up. The drive to the Hamiltons' Upper East Side apartment was quiet, Martha staring out the window at the December cityscape with unseeing eyes. I'd been to their apartment countless times over the years, holidays, dinner parties, the occasional Sunday brunch. It felt strange to return now under these circumstances. Can I make you something to eat? I asked as we entered the elegant foyer. Some tea, perhaps? Tea would be nice, she said distractedly. I'm going to shower first. I moved through the familiar kitchen, finding the tea kettle and Martha's preferred Earl Grey with ease. As I waited for the water to boil, I noticed family photos arranged on a shelf in the adjacent sitting room, George and Martha on their 50th anniversary, Daniel and Michael in graduation robes, a younger George holding a fishing rod beside a mountain lake. And there, among them, was a photo of Daniel and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing at something off camera. I picked it up, studying our faces, so young, so full of hope and love. It seemed impossible that those two people were the same ones who had sat across from each other in a lawyer's office, negotiating the division of hidden assets. That was a beautiful day, Martha said from behind me. I turned to find her in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her damp hair combed back from her face. Yes, it was, I agreed, replacing the photo carefully. I hope you don't mind that I kept it out, she said. I couldn't bear to put it away, even after everything. I don't mind, I said, and found that I meant it. It was a happy memory. There were many happy years, she said softly, before Daniel, before he started making his father's mistakes. The statement caught me off guard. What do you mean? Martha sighed, moving to sit on the sofa. Did you ever wonder why I wasn't more surprised by Daniel's infidelities? Why I didn't condemn him more strongly? I had wondered that, had sometimes resented her apparent acceptance of her son's behavior. Yes, I admitted, because I've been exactly where you were, she said. George wasn't always the devoted husband you've known. In the early years of our marriage, When the boys were small and he was building his career, she trailed off, then continued more firmly. He strayed, multiple times. The revelation stunned me. George and Martha had always seemed like the perfect couple. Affectionate, respectful, deeply connected. I had no idea, I said. No one did. We kept it private. I threatened to leave him, and he changed. Truly changed. Her eyes filled with tears. 40 years of faithfulness since then. But the pattern was set for the boys, especially Daniel. He saw his father's early behavior, absorbed the lesson that powerful men take what they want. I sat beside her, processing this new information that cast my marriage in a different light. Why are you telling me this now? Because life is fragile, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the hospital we'd left. And because I want you to know that I understood your pain, that I never excused what Daniel did to you. She took my hand, and perhaps, selfishly, because I need you to understand why I didn't cut ties with him, why I couldn't condemn my own son for repeating his father's sins. I understand, I said, and I did. The complicated web of love and disappointment that bound families together was something I knew all too well. Martha wiped her eyes. Enough about the past. The tea must be ready by now. I brought her a cup, then sat with her while she drank it, our conversation turning to more neutral topics, mutual acquaintances, a gallery exhibition she'd recently attended, my latest design projects. After finishing her tea, she retired to her bedroom to rest, extracting my promise to wake her in 3 hours. I used the time to make some work calls, rearranging my schedule for the next few days to accommodate this unexpected situation. Around mid-afternoon, Daniel called with an update. "Dad's awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Just briefly, but he recognized Michael and me. The doctor says it's a very good sign." "That's wonderful news," I said. "I'll tell your mother when she wakes up." "How is she?" "Exhausted, but holding up. She's sleeping now." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for being there for her, Elena. I know it's complicated between us." "She's been good to me," I said simply. "I want to be there for her now." After we hung up, I sat for a long while in the Hamiltons' living room, surrounded by the artifacts of their family life. Books, photographs, small treasures collected over decades together. Despite everything that had happened with Daniel, I realized I didn't want to lose this connection entirely. Martha and George had been my family for 15 years, had loved me in their way even when their son had failed to. When Martha emerged from her bedroom, looking somewhat refreshed, I gave her the good news about George. Her face lit up with hope, years seeming to fall away with her relief. "We should go back," she said, already moving toward her closet. "I want to be there when he wakes again." On the drive back to the hospital, Martha reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm so glad you're here, Elena. It means more than you know." The next few days fell into a pattern. George continued to improve. Slowly, his periods of wakefulness increasing, his strength gradually returning. I split my time between the hospital, work, and my own home, becoming a sort of liaison between the Hamilton family and the outside world, bringing fresh clothes and home-cooked meals to Martha, fielding calls from concerned friends and relatives, even helping Daniel and Michael sort through their father's medical paperwork. It was an unexpected role, one that blurred the boundaries I'd tried to establish after the divorce. But there was something healing about it too, a way of honoring the good parts of my connection to this family while letting go of the painful aspects of my marriage. One evening, a week after George's heart attack, I arrived at the hospital to find Daniel alone in his father's room. George was sleeping, the monitors showing stable vital signs. "Where's your mother?" I asked, setting down the tote bag containing her requested items. "Michael took her to dinner," Daniel said. "Forced her to leave for an hour. The doctor said Dad's out of danger now, so she finally agreed." I nodded, turning to go. I'll come. Back tomorrow, then. Wait, Daniel called softly. Stay for a bit. I could use the company. Something in his voice, a vulnerability I rarely heard from him, made me hesitate. All right, I agreed, taking a seat in the chair opposite his. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft beeping of machines and George's steady breathing. It was strange being alone with Daniel after everything that had happened, the divorce, the hidden assets, the legal battle. Yet here we were, united in concern for his father. I've been thinking a lot this week, Daniel said finally, about family, about the kind of son I've been, the kind of husband I was. I remained silent, unsure where this was heading. I owe you an apology, he continued. A real one, not the perfunctory ones I've given before. Daniel, please let me say this. He met my eyes directly. I was unfaithful, repeatedly, to a woman who loved me and deserved better. I lied to you, gaslighted you when you confronted me with evidence, made you feel crazy for suspecting what was actually happening. And then, as if that wasn't enough, I tried to cheat you financially during our divorce. The blunt acknowledgement of his actions startled me. In all our years together, even during therapy, Daniel had never been this forthright about his behavior. What brought this on? I asked. He gestured toward his sleeping father. Nearly losing him. Realizing that if he had died, I would have had to live with the knowledge that I'd disappointed him in the most fundamental way, that I'd become the worst version of myself. He swallowed hard. Mom told me she talked to you about Dad's past indiscretions. I nodded. She did. What she might not have told you is that he apologized to me and Michael a few years ago. Sat us down and explained that his behavior in those early years was his greatest regret, that he hoped we would be better men than he had been. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. And look how that turned out. Both of us repeating his mistakes but without his capacity for change, for genuine remorse. I didn't know what to say. This was a Daniel I hadn't seen in years. Reflective, humble, willing to acknowledge his failings without deflection or excuse. I'm not telling you this to win you back, he added quickly. I know that ship has sailed, and rightly so. I just wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I did to you, and I am truly, deeply sorry. Thank you, I said finally. That means something to me. He nodded, seemingly relieved to have said his piece. We lapsed into a more comfortable silence, the heaviness between us lightened somewhat by his unexpected apology. When Martha and Michael returned from dinner, I made my excuses and prepared to leave. Daniel walked me to the elevator, stopping me with a light touch on my arm before I stepped inside. One more thing, he said. I saw you at that restaurant. A few weeks ago with Stephanie. You looked happy, confident. He smiled slightly. It suited you. I am happy, I said, surprised to find it was true. Getting there anyway. Good, you deserve that. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As they closed between us, I caught a final glimpse of Daniel's face. Thoughtful, a little sad, but with none of the anger or resentment that had characterized our interactions in recent months. That night, back at the brownstone, I found myself reflecting on Daniel's apology, on the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, I'd signed divorce papers while his brother's girlfriend's pregnancy announcement lit up his phone. Now I was helping his family through a medical crisis, receiving perhaps the most genuine apology he'd ever offered me. The human heart was more complex than any design project I'd ever undertaken, the renovation of a life more challenging than that of any brownstone. Yet here I was, piecing together a new existence from the fragments of the old, finding unexpected beauty in the process. Chapter 7. George Hamilton was released from the hospital 3 days before Christmas, weak but recovering well. I helped Martha prepare their apartment for his return. making sure pathways were clear for the walker he'd need initially, setting up a comfortable area in the living room where he could rest during the day without being confined to bed. "You've thought of everything," Martha said gratefully as I arranged pillows on the sofa. "I don't know how I would have managed all this without you." "It's nothing," I assured her, interior design skills finally being put to practical use. When Daniel and Michael arrived with George, I stayed in the background, not wanting to intrude on the family moment. But George spotted me immediately. "Elena," he called, his voice weaker than I remembered but his smile unchanged. "Come give an old man a hug." I approached cautiously, mindful of his fragile state, but he pulled me into a surprisingly strong embrace. "Thank you for taking care of Martha," he whispered, "and for being here." "I wouldn't be anywhere else," I said, blinking back tears. Later, as George rested and Martha bustled around the kitchen preparing a light meal for him, Daniel cornered me in the hallway. "I have a favor to ask," he said. "A big one." "What is it?" I asked warily. "Christmas Eve dinner. Here. With the family." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness I recognized from our years together. Dad's insisting on maintaining the tradition, despite his condition. Mom's overwhelmed with his care. Michael and I are useless in the kitchen. "And you want me to cook," I finished for him. "More than that," he admitted. "Mom was hoping you'd help her host, like you always did." I told her it was too much to ask given everything, but she insisted I try. I hesitated. Christmas Eve with the Hamiltons had been our tradition throughout our marriage, an elegant dinner for family and close friends, followed by midnight mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The thought of participating now, as Daniel's ex-wife, was strange. Yet I couldn't deny Martha when she was dealing with George's recovery. "I'll do it," I said finally. "But just to be clear, I'm doing this for your parents, not for you." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Understood. And, thank you. It will mean a lot to them." He paused. "Will you bring Stephanie?" The question caught me off guard. Why would I bring Stephanie? Mom mentioned you two have become close. She thought you might want to invite her, rather than leaving her alone for the holiday. The consideration was unexpected. "I'll ask her," I said, "but I'm not sure she'll be comfortable spending Christmas Eve with Michael." "Fair enough," Daniel acknowledged. "The invitation is open if she wants it." When I called Stephanie that evening to explain the situation, her reaction was predictable. "Are you insane?" she exclaimed. "You're going to cook Christmas dinner for the family that betrayed both of us?" "For George and Martha," I clarified, "who have been nothing but kind to me, even through the divorce." "Still," she said skeptically, "it's weird, Elena. You have to admit that." "It's definitely unconventional," I agreed. "But George almost died. Martha's exhausted. It feels like the right thing to do." She was quiet for a moment. "You're a better person than I am." "Not better," I said. "Just further along in the process, maybe. I've had more time to work through things." "And they actually invited me too?" she asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "Yes. But I told Daniel I didn't think you'd be comfortable with Michael there." "Damn right," she muttered. Then, to my surprise, "But I might come anyway, for you, so you're not facing this strange situation alone." "You don't have to do that," I assured her. "I know. But what are friends for, if not to support each other through awkward ex-spouse holiday dinners?" Her loyalty warmed me. "If you're sure." "I'm sure. Besides, I'm curious to see how Michael reacts. And I make an excellent bourbon pecan pie that might just make the whole uncomfortable experience worthwhile." And so, on Christmas Eve, Stephanie and I arrived at the Hamiltons' apartment laden with groceries and pre-prepared dishes. I'd spent the previous day cooking in my kitchen, making Martha's favorite wild mushroom soup, preparing the dough for my traditional dinner rolls, marinating. The beef tenderloin that was always the centerpiece of the Hamilton Christmas Eve meal. Martha greeted us at the door, her face lighting up when she saw both of us. "Elena, Stephanie, come in, come in." The apartment was beautifully decorated, as always. The 12-foot tree in the living room adorned with the Hamilton family's collection of heirloom ornaments, garlands draped along the mantelpiece, arrangements of white amaryllis and red roses on every surface. Martha had clearly managed the decorating despite her caretaking duties. "George is napping," she explained, as she helped us unload our bags in the kitchen. "The excitement of coming home has tired him out, but he's determined to join us for dinner." "How many people are coming?" I asked, surveying the dining room where the table was already set for 8. "Just family," Martha said. "You two, me, and George, Daniel, Michael." She hesitated. "And Daniel is bringing someone. A friend." Stephanie and I exchanged glances. "A female friend?" Stephanie asked bluntly. Martha nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Her name is Alexis. She's an art historian he met at a gallery opening last month. I told him it might be awkward given the, circumstances, but he insisted she was important to him. I absorbed this information, surprised by the twinge of something I felt. Not jealousy, exactly, but a certain displacement. Daniel was moving on, building a new life that included dating other women. Of course he was. Our divorce was final. That had been the point of the dinner at Le Bernardin all those months ago. "It's fine," I assured Martha. "Really, I'm glad Daniel is finding happiness." She squeezed my hand gratefully. "You're too good, Elena. Always have been." Stephanie and I set to work in the kitchen, falling into an easy rhythm as we prepared the meal. Around 5 o'clock, Michael arrived, stopping short when he saw Stephanie chopping vegetables at the counter. "Stephanie," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I didn't know you were coming." "Surprise," she said dryly, not looking up from her task. Martha intervened smoothly. "Michael, would you check on your father? I think he's awake now." After he left, Stephanie set down her knife. "This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come." "No," I said firmly. "You belong here as much as he does. More, actually, since you were invited specifically. Don't let him make you feel unwelcome." She took a deep breath. "You're right. I'm not leaving just because he's uncomfortable. That would be letting him win." By 6 o'clock, the apartment was filled with delicious aromas and the low hum of conversation from the living room, where Martha had settled George in his favorite chair. Stephanie and I were putting the finishing touches on the dinner when the doorbell rang. "That'll be Daniel and his friend," Martha said, a note of anxiety in her voice. I straightened my dress, a simple green velvet I'd chosen for its festive color rather than any particular style points, and exchanged a look with Stephanie. "Ready for this?" "As I'll ever be," she replied, squeezing my hand quickly. Daniel entered the kitchen first, looking handsome in a charcoal suit and red tie. Behind him came a tall, elegant woman with short silver hair and striking blue eyes, dressed in an architectural black dress that screamed art world sophistication. "Elena, Stephanie," Daniel said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "This is Alexis Ryder." "It's lovely to meet you both," Alexis said, stepping forward to shake our hands. "Daniel has told me so much about you." I smiled politely, wondering exactly what Daniel had told this woman about his ex-wife and former sister-in-law. "Welcome," I said. "Dinner's almost ready." "Can I help with anything?" she offered. "We've got it under control," Stephanie said, a bit too quickly. "But thanks." Daniel guided Alexis back to the living room, leaving Stephanie and me alone in the kitchen. "Well," Stephanie whispered, "she's not what I expected." "Me neither," I admitted. I'd imagined Daniel with someone younger, more conventionally beautiful, the type of woman who'd been the subject of his affairs during our marriage. Alexis appeared to be in her late 40s, with an intellectual air and confident presence that was completely different from both me and the women Daniel had cheated with. "She seems substantial," Stephanie said thoughtfully. "Not like his usual arm candy." "Maybe he's growing up," I suggested, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my tone. Dinner was a strangely civilized affair. George, propped up with pillows at the head of the table, held court with stories from his early legal career, clearly making an effort to keep the conversation flowing and minimize awkward silences. Martha fussed over him, cutting his meat and ensuring his water glass was always full. Michael said little, focusing on his food and occasionally checking his phone under the table. Alexis proved to be intelligent and engaging, sharing fascinating anecdotes about her work curating modern art collections for corporate clients. It was impossible to dislike her, though I sensed Stephanie trying her best to find fault. "This tenderloin is exceptional, Elena," George complimented as he savored a bite. "You haven't lost your touch." "Thank you," I said. "It's your recipe, after all." "Ah, but execution is everything," he said with a wink. "Elena is an amazing cook," Daniel told Alexis. "She made everything except Stephanie's pie." "I'm impressed," Alexis said warmly. "And grateful. This is my first Hamilton family Christmas Eve, and it's lovely." Her comment highlighted the surreal nature of the situation. Daniel's new girlfriend eating Christmas dinner prepared by his ex-wife, alongside his brother and his brother's ex-wife, all pretending this was somehow normal. Yet, as the meal progressed, I found myself relaxing into the strangeness of it. There was something almost liberating about being here in this new capacity. No longer Daniel's wife, responsible for upholding the Hamilton family image, but simply Elena, a friend of the family contributing to a holiday gathering. After dinner, as George tired and retired to bed with Martha's assistance, the rest of us moved to the living room for coffee and Stephanie's bourbon pecan pie. Michael immediately excused himself to make a phone call, leaving Daniel, Alexis, Stephanie, and me in an awkward quartet. "So," Stephanie said after a moment of silence, "how did you two meet?" Daniel looked uncomfortable, but Alexis answered smoothly. "At the Whitney's new exhibition opening. We got into a friendly argument about a particularly controversial installation piece and somehow ended up continuing the debate over dinner. Daniel always did enjoy a good argument," I said, unable to resist the small dig. Alexis laughed. "He's met his match with me then. I never concede a point without thorough evidence." "Good for you," Stephanie said, raising her coffee cup in salute. Someone needs to keep these Hamilton men in check. An awkward silence followed her comment, broken when Martha returned to the living room. "George is settled," she announced. "He wanted me to tell everyone how much he enjoyed having you all here tonight." "We should probably go," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "It's getting late and you must be exhausted." "Yes, of course," Martha said, though she looked disappointed. "But first I have something for both of you." She retrieved 2 small packages from beneath the Christmas tree. "Just a little thank you for all you've done these past weeks." She handed one to me and one to Stephanie, who looked startled to be included in the gift-giving. "You didn't have to do this," I protested. "I wanted to," Martha insisted. "Please open them now." I carefully unwrapped my package to find a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature set of keys. "The keys to our heart and home," Martha explained, "to remind you that you're always welcome here, no matter what." Tears sprang to my eyes at the thoughtful gesture. "It's beautiful, Martha. Thank you." Stephanie opened her gift next. A similar bracelet but with a different charm, a small silver bird. "For your new freedom," Martha told her, "and the heights you'll soar to now." Stephanie looked genuinely moved. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Martha assured her. just know that I see you both, the strength you've shown, the grace with which you've handled difficult circumstances." She glanced briefly toward the hallway where Michael had disappeared. "Not everyone in this family has behaved honorably, but that doesn't diminish my regard for either of you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Alexis watched the exchange with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. After Martha's gifts, the evening wound down naturally. Stephanie and I gathered our coats while Daniel called for a car to take us home. "I'll walk you down," he offered when the doorman called to say the car had arrived. In the elevator, an awkward silence fell between the three of us. Stephanie broke it first. "So, Alexis seems nice," she said, in a tone that suggested she was surprised by this assessment. "She is," Daniel agreed. "She's different from anyone I've dated before." "I noticed that," I said. "She seems very self-possessed." "She is that too," he said with a small smile. "Challenges me constantly. It's refreshing." The elevator reached the lobby, and we stepped out into the marble-floored entryway. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the sidewalk with a fine white powder. "Thank you both for coming tonight," Daniel said as the door of This Is Fair. I was shouting now, not caring who heard. It wasn't fair when I found out about the first affair, or the second, or however many there were that I never discovered. It wasn't fair when you told me you still loved me but couldn't remain faithful. And it's certainly not fair that the night we end our marriage, I find out you're starting the family you always wanted, just not with me. The taxi driver rolled down his window. "You getting in or what, lady?" "Yes," I said, pushing past Daniel. "I'm getting in." Daniel caught the door before I could close it. "Rebecca isn't my girlfriend." I stared at him. "What?" He looked pained. "She's my brother's girlfriend. Michael's been seeing her for a few months. That's why the text came to me. She must have been trying to reach him but got our numbers confused in her contacts." The world tilted sideways. "Michael? But he's married to Stephanie." Daniel's expression confirmed what I already knew. The Hamilton men and their wandering eyes, a family tradition. "Does Stephanie know?" I asked. "I don't think so. Not yet." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, can we talk somewhere private? Not about us. That's finished, I know. But this is a family matter, and it's not something that should be handled on a Manhattan sidewalk." Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to leave him with his family's mess. But another part, the part that had been entwined with the Hamiltons for 20 years, couldn't just walk away. "Fine," I said. "But not tonight. I can't do this tonight." He nodded, stepping back from the cab. "Tomorrow? Coffee at that place near the brownstone you like?" "Okay, 9 o'clock. "Thank you," he said simply. I closed the door and gave the driver my address in Brooklyn. As the taxi pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Daniel in the side mirror, standing alone on the sidewalk, looking lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all the pain he'd caused, all the betrayals and lies, I still felt a pang of sympathy for him. Love didn't die easily, even when it should. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. The papers were signed. In the eyes of the law, I was no longer Elena Hamilton. I was Elena Mercer again, a woman I hadn't been since I was 25 years old. Now, I just had to figure out who she was. Chapter 2. The brownstone was dark. When I arrived home, the only light coming from the small lamp I'd left on in the entryway. I paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the 3-story building that had been my passion project for years. Built. In 1901, the limestone facade had been meticulously restored under my supervision. The original stained glass transom window above the front door glowed faintly, one of the first features that had made me fall in love with the place when Daniel and I had toured it 8 years ago. "It needs too much work," he'd said at the time. We should look at those new luxury condos in Dumbo instead. But I'd persisted, showing him sketches of what it could become, explaining how the separate entrance to the garden level could someday be my design studio. He'd relented eventually, as he usually did when I was passionate about something. Now, as I climbed the steps and unlocked the front door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in what I'd created here, relief that it was still mine, and an unexpected hollowness, knowing that from now on, I alone would walk through this, darker at the end of each day. I hung my coat in the closet and kicked off my heels, listening to the silence of the house. After the cacophony of emotions at dinner, the quiet felt both soothing and oppressive. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Nora. Made it home okay? Yes, I'm home. Talk tomorrow. I replied, not wanting to get into the revelation about Rebecca being Michael's girlfriend, not Daniel's. That was a complication for another day. I padded to the kitchen at the back of the house and poured myself a generous glass of red wine from an open bottle in the fridge. The kitchen had been my first renovation project, expanding it into what had once been a small sunroom, adding a wall of windows overlooking the garden, installing the marble island where I now perched on a bar stool. Daniel had been impressed. When it was finished, had even hosted a dinner party to show it off to his colleagues. But he'd never understood that for me, the renovation wasn't about having a showplace. It was about creating a heart for our home, a place where we could cook together on lazy Sundays or host the children we'd hoped to have. I took a long sip of wine, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue. Children. Another dream that had died slowly, painfully over the years of our marriage. 3 pregnancies, none making it past the first trimester. The specialists, the treatments, the final diagnosis of a uterine abnormality that made carrying to term nearly impossible. Daniel had been supportive at first. We can adopt, he'd said, holding me as I cried after the 3rd miscarriage. Or try surrogacy. There are options, Elena. But as time passed, the subject came up less frequently. Daniel's career accelerated. He made partner at his firm. I threw myself into renovating the brownstone, then into launching my design business. We became that couple, successful, childless, leading separate lives under the same roof. Until the day I found the receipt from the Hotel Gansevoort in his suit pocket while doing laundry. Just a small slip of paper that unraveled everything. I drained my wineglass and poured another. The alcohol was softening the edges of the evening, blurring the sharp pain of seeing that text message illuminate Daniel's phone. I'm pregnant. The words someone else would say to my husband, ex-husband now, not his girlfriend, his brother's girlfriend. As if that made it better somehow. I carried my wine to the living room and sank onto the sofa, staring out at the small garden illuminated by moonlight. The divorce papers were signed. I should feel something definitive, relief, perhaps, or a clean sense of closure. Instead, I felt adrift, untethered from the identity I'd carried for 15 years. My phone buzzed again. Daniel this time. Are you okay? Such a simple question, one he'd asked countless times throughout our relationship, after difficult client meetings. During my father's heart surgery, after each miscarriage. Are you okay? 3 words that had once meant he cared, that I wasn't alone in whatever struggle I was facing. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on the truth. I don't know. His reply came immediately. I'm sorry about tonight. About everything. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Sorry for the public embarrassment of the text? Sorry for the affairs that had led to our divorce? Sorry for the years we'd wasted trying to make something. Work that had been broken for longer than either of us had been willing to admit. Before I could decide whether to reply, another text came through. Sleep well, Elena. So formal. So final. I placed my phone on the coffee table, screen down, and leaned back against the cushions. The wine was making me drowsy, dulling the sharp edges of the evening. I should go upstairs to bed, remove my makeup, go through the nightly routine that anchored my days. Instead, I curled up on the sofa, pulled the throw blanket over me, and closed my eyes. Just for a minute, I told myself. Just until I found the energy to climb the stairs to the bedroom that had once been ours and was now just mine. I awoke, with a start, disoriented in the dark living room. My phone was ringing. The actual ring, not a text notification. I fumbled for it on the coffee table, squinting at the screen. Stephanie, Michael's wife. It was nearly midnight. "Hello?" My voice was rough with sleep. "Elena? It's Stephanie. I'm sorry to call so late, but I didn't know who else to talk to." She was crying, her words punctuated by small gasps. "What's wrong?" I sat up, instantly alert. "Are you hurt?" "No, not physically." She took a shuddering breath. "It's Michael. There's someone else. A woman named Rebecca. She's pregnant." I closed my eyes. Of course the truth had come out after dinner. How could it not, with the Hamiltons all gathered together and a bomb like that detonating in their midst? "I know," I said gently. "I just found out tonight too." "You knew?" Stephanie sounded shocked. "Did everyone know except me?" No. The text came through on Daniel's phone during dinner. At first I thought... I trailed off, not wanting to admit I'd assumed it was Daniel's girlfriend. "That it was about Daniel," she finished for me. I would have thought the same thing, given his history. There was an awkward pause. Stephanie and I had been friendly over the years, but never close confidants. She was 10 years younger than Michael, a former legal assistant at his firm who had caught his eye 6 years ago. They'd married quickly, had no children yet. I'd always sensed her insecurity around the Hamilton family's wealth and status. "Where are you?" I asked. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at my sister's apartment in Queens." She sniffled. "I couldn't stay in the house with him. Not after what he told me." "I'm so sorry, Stephanie. He says he loves her." Her voice broke on the words. "Says they've been seeing each other for almost a year. That the pregnancy wasn't planned, but he's happy about it." My heart sank. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown relationship, one Michael had apparently been investing in emotionally as well as physically. "I don't know what to do," Stephanie continued. "Everything happened so fast after dinner. Daniel pulled Michael aside, they talked, and then Michael came home and just confessed everything, like he'd been waiting for an excuse. I thought of the text message, how it had exposed everything in an instant. Technology making it impossible to compartmentalize our lives the way people once could. "I know this is strange calling you tonight of all nights," Stephanie said, "with your divorce being finalized. But I thought, you've been through this. You know what it's like." Did I? My situation with Daniel had unfolded differently. Series of affairs rather than one significant relationship, no pregnancy involved. But the betrayal, the shattering of trust. Yes, I knew about that. "Do you want to come over?" I offered impulsively. "I have plenty of room, and maybe it would help to talk in person." Stephanie hesitated. "I don't want to impose, and honestly, I'm not sure I can face any Hamilton connections right now, even you." "I understand, but the offer stands if you change your mind." I paused. "And Stephanie? For what it's worth, I'm not a Hamilton anymore. As of tonight, I'm back to being Elena Mercer." "How does that feel?" she asked quietly. I considered the question. Unreal. Like I'm playing a part in someone else's life. "Yeah," she said. "That's exactly how I feel right now, too." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness, thinking about Stephanie and what lay ahead for her. The painful decisions, the legal proceedings, the rebuilding of an identity separate from the man she'd married. I'd had months to adjust to the end of my marriage, to process the grief and anger before tonight's formal conclusion. Stephanie was just beginning that journey, with the additional complication of her husband's pregnant girlfriend. I thought about texting Daniel, asking him what had happened after I left the restaurant, how the revelation about Michael and Rebecca had unfolded. But it wasn't my place anymore to be his confidant, to help him navigate his family's dramas. Instead, I finally made my way upstairs to the master bedroom. The room I'd once shared with Daniel had been the first space I'd reclaimed after he moved out, repainting the walls a soothing sage green, replacing the masculine furniture he'd preferred with pieces that reflected my own aesthetic: a velvet, upholstered bed frame, vintage nightstands I'd found at a flea market and restored myself, a delicate vanity by the window. I sat at that vanity now, removing my makeup with methodical care, studying my reflection in the mirror. At 43, I was still attractive. My dark hair showed no signs of gray yet. My olive skin had few wrinkles thanks to good genes and diligent skincare. But there was something different in my eyes tonight, a wariness that hadn't been there this morning. I'd thought signing the divorce papers would be the final page of a difficult chapter. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a story I wasn't sure I was ready to read. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. I squinted at the bedside clock. 7:36 a.m. Less than 90 minutes until I was supposed to meet Daniel for coffee. My head throbbed slightly from the wine, and my mouth felt dry. I shuffled to the bathroom and brushed my teeth, then stood under a hot shower, letting the water wash away the residue of last night's emotions. As I dressed in jeans and a casual sweater, I considered canceling the meeting with Daniel. Whatever. Family drama was unfolding with Michael, and Rebecca wasn't my problem anymore. But curiosity and a lingering sense of connection pulled at me. And, if I was honest with myself, I wanted to see Daniel in the cold light of day, wanted to test whether I could face him as Elena Mercer rather than Elena Hamilton. The coffee shop was just 3 blocks from the brownstone, a small independent place with excellent pastries and strong espresso. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the back corner, 2 cups in front of him. "You remembered my order," I said as I slid into the seat across from him. He offered a faint smile. "Oat milk latte with an extra shot. Some things don't fade from memory that easily." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, studying him across the table. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. "Rough night?" I asked. "You could say that." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "After you left, all hell broke loose. Michael denied everything at first, then admitted it when I showed him the text. Our parents were... well, you can imagine. Actually, I can't. Your mother always seemed to excuse your behavior. Why would Michael be any different?" Daniel winced. "That's fair. But this time was different. Rebecca is 26, and she was an intern at his firm when they started seeing each other. Mom called it predatory." "She's not wrong," I said, taking a sip of my latte. "Does Stephanie know all the details?" He nodded. "I made Michael tell her everything last night. It was brutal, but necessary. She called me afterward." Daniel looked surprised. "Stephanie called you? Why?" "I think she wanted to talk to someone who'd been through something similar." I shrugged, though our situations aren't quite the same. "No," he agreed quietly. "They're not." An awkward silence fell between us. I broke it first. "So, what happens now? With Michael and Stephanie? With this Rebecca person?" Daniel's expression darkened. The Hamilton men and their convenient lies. "Well, she didn't know?" I said. "And now she's devastated, as I was when I found out about Daniel's affairs." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Michael always spoke highly of you, said you were the strong one in the family. I thought maybe you'd understand. Understand what, exactly? That sometimes love is messy. That people make mistakes. Her voice cracked slightly. I never meant to hurt anyone. I sank onto the bench in my entryway, suddenly exhausted. What do you want from me, Rebecca? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe just someone to talk to who knows the Hamiltons, who understands what I'm up against. I laughed without humor. I just divorced one Hamilton after 15 years of marriage. I'm the last person who should be giving advice on how to join that family. But you survived it, she said. You seem intact, strong. Did I? The thought was oddly flattering, even coming from the woman whose text message had turned my divorce dinner into a spectacle. Look, Rebecca, I said finally. I can't help you navigate your relationship with Michael or his family. That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. I understand, she said, disappointment clear in her voice. I'm sorry to have bothered you. I should have ended the call there. Should have wished her good luck and hung up. Instead, I heard myself asking, have you told your family about the pregnancy? Not yet. She sighed. My parents are very traditional. They're going to be horrified that I'm having a baby with a married man almost twice my age. I could picture her, young, probably beautiful, terrified of the path ahead. Despite myself, I felt a twinge of sympathy. One piece of advice, I said. If you really love Michael and he really loves you, then build your relationship on honesty from this point forward. The Hamiltons can smell deception, and they'll use it against you if they can. Thank you, she said, sounding genuinely grateful. And Elena? I really am sorry about the timing of that text. I had no idea about the divorce dinner. It doesn't matter now, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Goodbye, Rebecca. I ended the call and sat there in my entryway, wondering what had possessed me to offer even that small kindness to the woman whose pregnancy announcement had so publicly punctuated the end of my marriage. Perhaps it was because in her voice, I'd heard echoes of my own younger self, the idealistic woman who'd fallen for Daniel Hamilton's charm and promises, who'd believed in the fairy tale despite all evidence to the contrary. Or perhaps it was simply that after 15 years of being defined by my relationship to the Hamilton family, I was finally free to choose my own reactions, to extend grace where once I might have harbored resentment. Whatever the reason, I felt lighter as I climbed the stairs to my office on the 3rd floor. The day stretched ahead of me, client meetings, design decisions, the ordinary business of being Elena Mercer, interior designer. Not Elena Hamilton. Betrayed wife, just Elena. Chapter 3, the next few weeks passed in a blur of work and readjustment. I threw myself into client projects, expanded my small staff by hiring a junior designer fresh out of Pratt, and even accepted an invitation to be featured in a Brooklyn lifestyle magazine that wanted to showcase the brownstone renovation. I didn't call Martha Hamilton back about brunch, and after a while she stopped calling. Part of me felt guilty. She had always been kind to me, had defended me even when her son was in the wrong. But another part recognized the need for clean breaks, for boundaries between my old life and the new one I was trying to build. Daniel texted occasionally, brief, neutral messages about mail that had arrived for me at his new apartment, or questions about jointly owned property we were still dividing. I responded with equal brevity, maintaining the careful distance that seemed necessary for both of us. As for Michael and Stephanie, their divorce proceedings had begun with surprising speed. According to Nora, who heard it from a mutual friend, Michael had moved in with Rebecca, purchasing a condo in a luxury building near his office. Stephanie had kept their house in Westchester, but was planning to sell it and move back to the city. It was strange how quickly lives could unravel and reshape themselves. How structures that had seemed permanent, marriages, families, identities, could dissolve and reform in new configurations. October arrived with crisp air and golden light that transformed Brooklyn. I was in my garden-level studio one Friday afternoon, reviewing fabric samples with my assistant Zoe when my phone rang. Stephanie's name flashed on the screen. "I need to take this," I told Zoe. "Can you organize these by color family while I step out?" She nodded, and I walked into the small courtyard garden to take the call. "Stephanie, how are you?" "Surviving," she said. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I wondered if that offer to stay with you was still open." I blinked in surprise. "Of course, but what happened? I thought you were keeping the house." "I am, but it's under contract now. The new owners want to close quickly, and my new apartment won't be ready for 3 weeks." She hesitated. "I know it's a lot to ask, especially given everything, but I really don't want to stay with my sister for that long. Her place is tiny, and she has 3 roommates." "You're welcome to stay here," I said without hesitation. "The guest room is comfortable, and I'm out at client meetings most days anyway." "Thank you, Elena. Seriously." The relief in her voice was palpable. "I'll be the perfect house guest, I promise. You won't even know I'm there." We arranged for her to arrive the following Tuesday. After we hung up, I stood in the garden for a few minutes, contemplating this unexpected development. Stephanie Hamilton, soon-to-be ex-wife of my ex-husband's brother, coming to live with me temporarily. It was an odd twist, but somehow it felt right. 2 women navigating similar challenges, supporting each other through the transition. When Tuesday arrived, I made sure the guest room was prepared with fresh linens and flowers. I cleared space, in the bathroom and a dresser drawer, remembering how strange it had felt to live out of suitcases during the limbo period of my own separation. Stephanie arrived in a taxi around noon, her designer luggage contrasting with the drawn, tired look on her face. "Thank you again for this," she said, as I helped her carry bags up to the guest room. "I didn't know where else to go." "I understand," I said. "Sometimes you need a neutral space to figure things out." She glanced around the tastefully decorated room. "This is beautiful. Did you design it?" I nodded. After Daniel moved out, I redesigned most of the rooms. It was therapeutic, creating spaces that were just for me. "I should hire you for my new apartment," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I've never lived alone before. Went from my parents' house to roommates in college to Michael." She twisted her wedding ring absently. "I have no idea how to create a home that's just mine." "We all figure it out eventually," I said. "And I'd be happy to help with design ideas, professionally, or just as a friend." She looked up, her expression vulnerable. "Are we friends, Elena? I always felt like you kept your distance when Michael and I got together." The question caught me off guard. I didn't mean to seem distant. It's just, the Hamilton family dynamics can be complicated. I was trying to navigate my own marriage, which was already struggling by then. "I get that now," she said. "At the time, I thought maybe you disapproved of me, the secretary who married the boss's son." "Never," I assured her. "If anything, I admired your confidence. You always seemed so sure of yourself, so comfortable in Michael's world." She laughed bitterly. "That was all an act." Inside, I was terrified they'd realize I didn't belong. She twisted her ring again. "Guess I was right to worry." "Stephanie, what happened with Michael and Rebecca has nothing to do with you not belonging. The problem is with him, not you." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. The wound was still too fresh, the self-doubt too pervasive. I remembered that feeling well. "Look," I said, "I need to head out for a client meeting. But how about dinner tonight? We can open a bottle of wine and talk properly." "I'd like that," she said, attempting a smile. "And really, thank you. This means more than you know." My client meeting ran long, and it was after 7 when I returned to the brownstone. I found Stephanie in the kitchen, cooking. "I hope this is okay," she said when I walked in. I wanted to contribute something to say thank you. The kitchen smelled wonderful. Garlic, herbs, something rich simmering on the stove. "It smells amazing," I said, dropping my bag on a chair. "What are you making?" "Coq au vin," she said. Michael hated French food, so I rarely got to cook it. This was my grandmother's recipe. Pause. I opened a bottle of red wine and poured 2 glasses while Stephanie finished cooking. We ate at the kitchen island, the conversation flowing more easily than I'd expected. She asked about my design business, and I found myself sharing stories about difficult clients and challenging spaces that made her laugh. "You're good at this," she said as we cleared the plates. "Building a life on your own terms." "I've had more practice," I reminded her. "You're just at the beginning." She carried her wine glass to the living room, and I followed. We settled on, opposite ends of the sofa facing each other. "Can I ask you something personal?" Stephanie said after a moment. "Of course. How did you know when it was really over? With Daniel, I mean. Was there a specific moment when you realized there was no going back?" I considered the question, thinking back to the progression of discovery, confrontation, attempted reconciliation, and finally acceptance that had marked the end of my marriage. "There was a moment," I said slowly. "About a year before we separated. We were at a dinner party, and I saw Daniel talking to a woman, a junior partner at his firm. Nothing inappropriate was happening, just conversation. But I saw the way he looked at her, the N fragmento 18, urgy between them, and I thought, that's how he used to look at me." I took a sip of wine. I realized then that no matter how many times he apologized for the affairs, no matter how many promises he made, something fundamental had changed between us. The way he loved me had changed. Stephanie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I keep waiting for that moment of clarity. Some days I hate Michael so much I can barely breathe. Other days I miss him so badly I consider calling him, begging him to come home. She wiped at her eyes. "Is that pathetic?" "It's human," I said, gently. "Love doesn't just disappear overnight, even when it's been betrayed." "Did you ever consider taking Daniel back? After the affairs?" "We tried counseling for almost a year," I admitted. "There were good moments, times when I thought we might find our way back to each other. But eventually I realized I was doing all the work, forgiving, understanding, making space for his growth. And he was just waiting for me to get over it, to stop bringing up the past." "That sounds familiar," Stephanie said. "Michael keeps saying he never meant to hurt me, that if I really loved him, I'd want him to be happy." "Classic Hamilton deflection," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Making their choices your responsibility somehow." She nodded vigorously. "Yes, exactly that. Like I'm the unreasonable one for being upset that my husband got another woman pregnant." "They're masters at it," I agreed. "Daniel once suggested that if I'd been more sexually adventurous, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." Stephanie's eyes widened. "He didn't." "He did. During a therapy session, no less. Our therapist nearly threw him out of her office." We both laughed, the shared understanding creating a warmth between us that I hadn't expected. For the first time since my divorce, I was talking to someone who truly understood the specific challenges of loving and leaving a Hamilton man. "You know what's really messed up?" Stephanie said, refilling our wine glasses. "Part of me is jealous. Of Rebecca. Not because she has Michael, she's welcome to him at this point, but because she gets to have his baby." Her voice broke. "We tried for 3 years. Tests, treatments, everything. The doctors could never find anything specifically wrong, it just didn't happen for us." My heart constricted, another parallel in our stories I hadn't known about. "I'm so sorry, Stephanie. I didn't realize you and Michael were trying for a baby." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "Michael said maybe it was for the best, since we were having problems anyway. But I can't help wondering if that's why he strayed. Because I couldn't give him a child. Don't do that to yourself, I said firmly. Daniel had affairs despite our fertility issues, not because of them. And from what I've seen of the Hamilton men, they cheat because of something broken in them, not because of any failing in their wives. Stephanie looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. When did you get so wise? Around the time I signed those divorce papers, I said with a small smile. Amazing how clarity finds you when you stop trying to fix someone else's issues. She raised her glass. To clarity, then. May it find me soon. We clinked glasses, and I felt something shift between us, a friendship forming from the ashes of our respective marriages. Unexpected, but welcome. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Stephanie already in the kitchen making coffee. I hope you don't mind, she said. I'm an early riser. Not at all. I accepted the mug she offered. What are your plans for today? Meeting with my lawyer at 11, then looking at paint samples for the new apartment. She hesitated. I was wondering if you'd be willing to come with me. For the paint samples, I mean. I could use a professional eye. I'd be happy to, I said. I can move some things around and meet you after your lawyer appointment. She beamed. That would be amazing, thank you. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Stephanie and I moved around each other comfortably, sharing meals when our schedules aligned, giving each other space when needed. I helped her choose paint colors and lighting fixtures for her new apartment, and she cooked elaborate dinners that made the brownstone feel more like a home than it had in months. It was strange how quickly I'd adjusted to having her there, how natural it felt to have another person in the space that had felt so empty after Daniel left. Not that I was lonely exactly. My work kept me busy, and I had friends I saw regularly. But there was something about daily companionship, about sharing the small details of life with someone who understood, that filled a void I hadn't fully acknowledged. On Friday evening, as we were sharing a bottle of wine after dinner, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Elena. His voice was tight. Is Stephanie staying with you? I glanced at Stephanie, who had tensed at the mention of her name. Yes, she is. Why? Michael's been trying to reach her. Says she's not answering his calls. Maybe because she doesn't want to talk to him, I suggested. Daniel sighed. Look, I'm not getting involved in their drama. I just promised Michael. I'd try to reach her. Apparently, there's some paperwork she needs to sign for the house closing. I covered the phone with my hand. It's about paperwork for the house, I told Stephanie. She rolled her eyes and held out her hand for the phone. I passed it to her. This is Stephanie, she said coolly. If Michael needs me to sign something, he can have his lawyer contact my lawyer. I don't care if it's urgent. He lost the right to urgency when he moved in with his pregnant girlfriend. No, I won't reconsider. Fine. Email it to me and I'll look at it when I have time. She hung up and handed the phone back to me. Sorry about that. No apology needed, I assured her. You handled that perfectly. She smiled ruefully. I've been practicing my assertiveness. How did I do? A solid 8 out of 10, I said, raising my wine glass in salute. Very impressive. I had a good teacher, she said, her expression turning serious. Watching you handle all this, the divorce, rebuilding your life, it's been inspiring. I felt a flush of unexpected pleasure at her words. I've just been doing what needed to be done. That's what makes it impressive, she insisted. You don't even realize how strong you are. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced down, expecting it to be from Daniel or Michael, but instead saw Rebecca's name. I need to talk to you. Please. It's important. Everything okay? Stephanie asked, noticing my expression change. I hesitated, unsure whether to tell her about Rebecca's previous call, let alone this new message. It's nothing important, I said finally, putting my phone screen down on the coffee table. Just work. Stephanie nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. We continued talking about her apartment plans, but my mind kept returning to Rebecca's text. What could be so important that she'd reach out to me again? And why did I feel this nagging sense of responsibility to respond? After Stephanie went up to bed, I picked up my phone and stared at Rebecca's message. I found something you should see. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were printouts of bank statements and transfer records. I don't understand, I said, scanning the documents. These are transactions between Hamilton Partners and what's Meridian Ventures? A shell company, Rebecca said, owned jointly by Michael and Daniel. They've been using it to hide assets from both you and Stephanie during the divorce proceedings. I stared at her, then back at the papers, my mind racing to process this information. How did you get these? I work in the firm's accounting department, she said, and Michael is careless with his passwords. When I started looking into his finances, I found references to Meridian. I dug deeper and discovered the whole scheme. The amounts on the statements were substantial. Millions shifted systematically from Hamilton Partners, the family's investment firm, to Meridian Ventures over the past year. Why are you showing me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you deserve your fair share, she said simply. And so does Stephanie. What they're doing isn't just dishonest. It's illegal. I closed the folder, my hands trembling slightly. If these documents were legitimate, they changed everything about my divorce settlement. I'd accepted Daniel's financial disclosures at face value, believing that despite his personal failings, he wouldn't cheat me financially. I need to verify this information, I said. Rebecca nodded. Of course. That's a copy for you to keep. I've sent the originals to my personal email as insurance. She stood to leave. I should go. I still have packing to finish. I remained, seated, still processing the bombshell she'd just dropped. Rebecca, I called as she turned to go. Thank you. And good luck. With the baby and everything. She offered a small smile. Thank you, Elena. I hope you get what you deserve from them. After she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the folder. It was like discovering Daniel's infidelity all over again. That same sick feeling of betrayal, of having been played for a fool. But this time, it wasn't just about Daniel. Michael was involved too, which meant Stephanie was also being deceived. I thought about all the times during settlement negotiations when Daniel had claimed certain assets were illiquid or tied up in family investments. His smooth explanations, his assurances that he was being completely transparent. All lies, apparently. I gathered the documents and hurried home, my mind racing with implications. I needed to talk to Vivian, to show her what Rebecca had uncovered. But first, I needed to tell Stephanie. She was in the kitchen when I returned, chopping vegetables for dinner. How was your spa day? I asked, trying to sound casual. Heavenly, she said, smiling. Thank you for arranging it. I haven't felt that relaxed in months. I set the folder on the island between us. Stephanie, there's something you need to see. Her smile faded as she took in my serious expression. What is it? What's wrong? I met with Rebecca today, I said, deciding honesty was the only approach. She's leaving Michael, going back to Ohio to have the baby. Stephanie's eyebrows rose. She told you this? Why would she reach out to you? To give me this. I opened the folder. And to apologize for her part in the whole mess. Stephanie wiped her hands on a towel and began examining the documents. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger as she understood what she was seeing. They've been hiding money, she said, her voice flat. Both of them. During both our divorces. I nodded. It looks that way. Those bastards. She slammed her hand on the counter. How much? How much have they hidden? From what I can tell from these records, at least 12 million in assets. Stephanie let out a low whistle. And Rebecca just gave you this information? Why would she do that? I think she wants to burn it all down before she leaves, I said. Can't say I blame her. What do we do now? Stephanie asked, looking up from the papers. I need to call my attorney, I said. And you should call yours. If these documents check out, we can petition the court to revisit our settlements based on fraudulent disclosures. Stephanie's expression hardened. Good. I want Michael to pay for this. She picked up her phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. As she made her call, I stepped into the living room to phone Vivian. My hands were still shaking as I dialed her number. Elena, she answered warmly. How are you holding up? I need to see you, I said without preamble. I've come into possession of documents showing Daniel and Michael have been hiding assets during our divorces. There was a pause, then, Are you certain of the provenance of these documents? They came from Michael's girlfriend, ex-girlfriend now. She works in accounting at their firm. Bring them to my office first thing Monday morning, Vivian said, her voice taking on the crisp efficiency I'd come to rely on. Don't discuss this with anyone else, especially not Daniel. Stephanie already knows, I said. She's staying with me, and the documents affect her settlement too. That's complicated, Vivian sighed, but understandable. Just keep this between the two of you for now. No confronting Daniel or Michael until we've verified everything. Understood, I said, though part of me wanted to call Daniel immediately, to hurl accusations and demand explanations. After ending the call, I returned to the kitchen to find Stephanie pacing, her face flushed with anger. My lawyer says the same thing yours did, she said. Wait until Monday. Don't confront them yet. I nodded. It's good advice. We need to make sure our legal strategy is solid before they know what's coming. I can't believe this, she said, shaking her head. Actually, no, I can believe it. This is exactly the kind of underhanded thing they would do. The Hamiltons looking out for themselves at everyone else's expense, I agreed. A family tradition. Stephanie picked up a wine bottle and 2 glasses. I think we need this tonight. As she poured, her hand trembled slightly, sending a few drops of red wine splashing onto the counter. Damn it, she muttered, reaching for a towel. It's okay, I said gently. A little wine never hurt a countertop. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It's not the wine. It's just... I thought I was finally moving forward, finally accepting that my marriage was over. And now this. She gestured to the folder. It's like they're reaching out from the past to hurt us all over again. I understood exactly what she meant. The documents had reopened wounds I'd thought were beginning to heal, had pulled me back into the anger and betrayal I'd been working so hard to move beyond. We'll get through this, I said, taking one of the wine glasses. And this time, we'll make sure they don't walk away with more than they deserve. Stephanie raised her glass. To justice. To justice, I echoed. As we drank, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange twists that had brought us to this moment. 2 women bonded by their connection to the Hamilton brothers, now allied against them. It wasn't the future I'd envisioned for myself, but there was a certain poetry to it nonetheless. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Had dinner with my parents tonight. Mom's still asking about brunch with you. Should I tell her to stop asking? I stared at the message, anger rising fresh within me. How dare he act so normal, so casual, while systematically hiding assets from our divorce proceedings? How many times had he looked me in the eye and lied about his finances? I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, I have a lot going on right now. Not a good time for brunch with your mother. His reply came quickly. Everything okay? The concern in those two simple words infuriated me further. No, everything was not okay. Nothing had been okay since the day I found lipstick on his collar, or perhaps long before that, from the moment he decided that our marriage vows were optional, that dishonesty was acceptable as long as it served his purposes. Fine, just busy. I turned off my phone before he could respond again. Monday suddenly seemed very far away. Chapter 4. The weekend crept by with excruciating slowness. Stephanie and I circled each other like caged tigers, both of us struggling to contain our anger and anticipation. We agreed not to discuss the documents further until we'd met with our attorneys, afraid that dwelling on them would only fuel the temptation to confront Daniel and Michael prematurely. Instead, we threw ourselves into helping Stephanie prepare for her move. We shopped for furniture, created design boards for each room of her new apartment, and spent Sunday evening watching mindless reality TV with more wine than was strictly advisable on a worknight. Monday morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence and competence, gathered the documents into my briefcase, and headed to Vivian's office for our 9 a.m. appointment. Her assistant showed me in immediately. Vivian stood to greet me, her expression grave. "Elena," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Let's see what you found." I handed over the folder, watching as she examined each document with meticulous attention. After several minutes, she looked up, her eyes sharp. "These appear credible," she said, "but we'll need to verify them independently. I'll hire a forensic accountant immediately." "How long will that take?" I asked. "A few days, if we're lucky. Perhaps a week." She tapped her fingers on the folder. "In the meantime, I'll file a motion to delay finalizing your divorce settlement. We should be able to reopen the case based on these findings. And if the documents are verified?" I leaned forward. "What happens then?" Vivian's lips curved in a tight smile. "Then, Elena, we go after everything they tried to hide. The courts don't look kindly on deliberate concealment of assets during divorce proceedings. We could potentially receive punitive damages beyond just your fair share of what they hid." The thought should have been satisfying. Daniel finally, facing consequences for his actions. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness. More money wouldn't heal the deeper wounds of betrayal, wouldn't restore my faith in the man I'd once believed Daniel to be. "What about Stephanie?" I asked. "Her divorce isn't finalized yet. How does this affect her case?" "She's in an even stronger position," Vivian said. "If her attorney moves quickly, they can include these allegations in their ongoing negotiations. Michael would be a fool not to settle generously once he knows what she has." I nodded, processing this information. "And what should I do in the meantime?" "Nothing," Vivian said firmly. "Don't confront Daniel. Don't respond to anything but the most casual communication from him. We want the element of surprise when we make our move." "I understand." As I left Vivian's office, I felt both lighter and heavier. The prospect of justice was emboldening, but the weight of yet another betrayal by Daniel pressed on my heart. How many times had he looked me in the eye and lied? How many aspects of our life together had been built on deception? When I returned to the brownstone, Stephanie was waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" she asked, following me into the kitchen. "Vivian thinks the documents are legitimate," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "She's hiring a forensic accountant to verify everything." My lawyer said the same thing. Stephanie paced the kitchen. He was practically salivating at the thought of what we might recover. "It's going to take time," I cautioned, "and we still need to keep quiet about what we know." She nodded, though her expression remained fierce. "I can wait. Knowing that Michael will finally pay for his dishonesty makes it easier to be patient." My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Forgot to mention, some mail came for you. Nothing urgent. Can drop it by this week if you want." I showed the message to Stephanie. Look at how casual he is, like he hasn't been systematically hiding millions in assets. They're both such good liars, she said bitterly. It's what makes them successful lawyers, I guess. I typed a brief response. I'll be out a lot this week. Just forward it to the brownstone. I don't know how you can be so calm, Stephanie said, watching me. I'd be tempted to throw my phone across the room every time Michael texts. Years of practice, I said. And besides, what good would it do? Getting emotional is exactly what they expect from us. She considered this. You're right. That's always been their defense, painting us as irrational, overly emotional women while they're the reasonable ones. Exactly. So we stay calm. We let the lawyers do their work. And when the time comes, we hit them with facts they can't explain away. The next few days passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Stephanie and I went about our daily routines. Me, with client meetings and design work. Her with preparations for her upcoming move. While the knowledge of what we'd discovered hummed beneath the surface of every moment. Daniel texted a few more times with mundane questions and updates. Each message felt like a test of my self-control, a reminder of the facade he maintained while secretly undermining our divorce agreement. On Thursday afternoon, Vivian called. The forensic accountant has made some preliminary findings, she said without preamble. The documents are legitimate. Meridian Ventures definitely exists, and it's definitely been receiving substantial transfers from Hamilton Partners. I sank onto a chair in my office. So they've been hiding assets. Yes, she confirmed. And not just from you and Stephanie. The structure they've created appears designed to shield money from taxes as well. This goes beyond divorce fraud, Elena. There could be federal tax implications. What does that mean for our case? It strengthens it considerably. I believe we're in a position to approach Daniel's attorney with what we know and demand a renegotiation of your settlement. When? I asked, my heart racing. Tomorrow, if you're ready. I've cleared my schedule for a meeting at 2 p.m. I'm ready, I said firmly. Will Daniel be there? Most likely. His attorney will want him present once they understand the seriousness of our allegations. After hanging up, I sat for a long moment, absorbing the reality that tomorrow I would face Daniel with evidence of his latest betrayal. Part of me dreaded seeing his reaction, his inevitable attempts to explain away or minimize what he'd done. Another part, a stronger part, welcomed the confrontation, the chance to finally hold him accountable. I called Stephanie to relay the news. My lawyer just called with the same update, she said excitedly. They're setting up a meeting with Michael's attorney for tomorrow morning. Looks like the Hamilton brothers are in for a rough day, I said, allowing myself a small smile. They deserve worse, Stephanie replied. But this will do for now. That evening, we opened a bottle of champagne, a small celebration of the validation we'd received, a toast to the justice we hoped was coming. I've been thinking, Stephanie said, her cheeks flushed from the champagne. After my apartment is ready and I move out, we should take a trip somewhere. Just us, a divorce recovery vacation. The suggestion caught me by surprise. Where would we go? Somewhere neither of us has been with them, she said thoughtfully. Somewhere new, with no memories attached. Maybe Italy? I've always wanted to see the Amalfi Coast. The idea was appealing, a fresh start, new memories to replace the painful ones. I'd like that, I said. Once all this legal business is settled. She raised her glass. To new beginnings, and to making the Hamilton men pay for underestimating us. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, a navy blue dress that was both professional and flattering, subtle makeup, my grandmother's pearl earrings for a touch of family strength, armor for the battle ahead. Stephanie had left early for her own meeting with Michael's attorneys. We'd texted a brief good luck to each other, a small gesture of solidarity before our separate confrontations. I arrived at Vivian's office at 1:45, my stomach in knots despite my outward composure. "They're already here," Vivian informed me as her assistant showed me in. "Daniel and Philip both. They seem concerned." "Good," I said, smoothing my dress. "They should be." Vivian led me to the conference room, opening the door with a flourish that announced our arrival as a power play rather than a courtesy. Daniel sat on one side of the long table, his attorney Philip beside him. They both stood as we entered. "Elena," Daniel said, his expression carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I took the seat Vivian pulled out for me, directly across from Daniel. "I would think nothing I do would surprise you anymore." Philip cleared his throat. "Ms. Nakamura has indicated you have concerns about the settlement agreement. Perhaps we could get straight to the point?" Vivian smiled thinly. "With pleasure." She opened a folder and slid copies of the Meridian Ventures documents across the table. "Perhaps you gentlemen could explain these to us." I watched Daniel's face as he examined the first page. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a muscle in his jaw tightening. Subtle tells I recognized from years of watching him respond to unexpected challenges in court cases or negotiations. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice remarkably steady. "That's not relevant," Vivian replied. "What is relevant is what they show, a systematic effort to hide assets during divorce proceedings. A fraudulent concealment that, as I'm sure Mr. Winters can confirm, constitutes grounds for reopening your settlement and potentially seeking punitive damages." Philip examined the documents with growing dismay. "We'll need time to review these materials," he said, his professional demeanor slipping slightly. "By all means," Vivian said graciously. "We have. Philip, please work with Ms. Nakamura to revise the settlement agreement based on a full accounting of all assets." He stood abruptly. "If that's all, I have a client meeting I need to prepare for." "That's not all," Vivian said smoothly. "We'll need full access to Meridian's financial records, as well as any other entities you may have created to shield assets. Plus, we'll be seeking compensation for legal fees associated with uncovering this fraud." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Philip will handle the details." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at me. "Elena?" he started, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Never mind. Good day." After he left, Philip made a valiant attempt to salvage some dignity. "My client acknowledges there may have been some oversights in the original financial disclosures. We're prepared to negotiate in good faith to rectify any discrepancies." "Oversights?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling deliberate concealment of millions in assets now? Interesting euphemism." The rest of the meeting consisted of Vivian outlining our demands while Philip took notes with increasingly resigned expression. When we finally concluded, I felt drained but triumphant. "That went as well as could be expected," Vivian said as she walked me out. "Daniel clearly didn't want this going to court. Smart man." "He's always been smart," I agreed. "Just not as smart as he thinks he is." When I returned to the brownstone, Stephanie was already there, her face flushed with the same mix of exhaustion and victory I felt. "How did it go?" I asked, setting my purse down. "Michael caved almost immediately," she said with a grim smile. "Didn't even try to deny it. Just sat there looking like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test while his lawyer tried to salvage the situation." "Daniel at least attempted to justify it," I said. "Called Meridian family business that predated our marriage." Stephanie snorted. "Please, we both know exactly when they set it up, right around the time your separation began." I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the sofa. "What did you ask for in the new settlement?" "Everything," she said fiercely. "The house in Westchester, half of what they hid in Meridian, and a separate monthly stipend to make up for the deception. My lawyer thinks we'll get most of it, if only to keep this quiet. That's essentially what we're asking for too, I said. Though I don't need the house, I have this place. Stephanie sat beside me. Does it feel good, making them pay? I considered the question. Not as good as I thought it would. There's satisfaction in not being taken advantage of, but I don't know. It doesn't erase everything else. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, two women who had weathered similar storms and found themselves unexpectedly allied on the other side. I've been thinking about that trip, I said finally. Italy sounds perfect. Let's plan it for real. Stephanie's face lit up. Really? You mean it? Absolutely. Once your new place is ready and all this legal business is settled, let's go. 2 weeks minimum. We'll eat pasta, drink wine, and not think about the Hamilton brothers at all. I'd like that, she said, squeezing my hand. I'd like that very much. In that moment, sitting in my beautiful brownstone with a new friend who understood exactly what I'd been through, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine optimism about the future. A future that, for the first time in decades, I was creating entirely on my own terms. Chapter 5. The legal negotiations moved faster than I'd expected. With the threat of public exposure hanging over them, Daniel and Michael seemed eager to resolve the matter quickly and quietly. Within 2 weeks, Vivian had secured a revised settlement that included my fair share of the hidden assets, plus additional compensation for the legal costs of uncovering the fraud. Stephanie's negotiations followed a similar trajectory. By early November, both of us had signed new agreements that substantially improved our financial positions. We should celebrate, Stephanie said one evening as we reviewed the final documents together at my kitchen island. Really celebrate, not just champagne at home. What did you have in mind? I asked. Remember that restaurant you mentioned, the one with the chef who studied in Barcelona? Let's get dressed up, go out, be seen enjoying ourselves. The idea appealed to me. The thought sent a chill through me that no amount of security measures could entirely dispel. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a state of controlled paranoia, following stringent security protocols while maintaining a facade of normal activity through the compromised systems Eliza had identified. The counterintelligence operation yielded valuable data, tracing unauthorized access to my accounts back to servers in several countries. We've identified one of the primary monitors, Captain Harlow reported during our daily update call. A man named Victor Mercer, based in Toronto. He matches one of the individuals from the photographs recovered from your former home. What do we know about him? Former cybersecurity specialist, left the legitimate sector about 10 years ago. Since then, he's been connected to various identity theft and financial fraud operations, though never successfully prosecuted. Based on the communications we've intercepted, he appears to be actively tracking your activities and reporting to someone else. The designated successor? Possibly. We're coordinating with Canadian authorities to place him under surveillance, hoping he'll lead us to his superior. Meanwhile, Eliza had made progress in identifying the source of the tampering with my home security system. The component was manufactured by a specialty electronics firm with only 3 authorized installers. In this region, she explained, I've traced the specific serial number to a batch purchased by C-Safe Security Services. I recognized the name immediately. They handled the upgrade to my system after Mason's crimes were first discovered. Captain Harlow recommended them. Eliza nodded grimly. Which suggests someone at C-Safe is connected to the network. A perfect position to compromise security systems for high-value targets. This information was immediately shared with law enforcement, who began investigating C-Safe's personnel and client records. Within days, they had identified a technician named Paul Deering, who had installed systems for several wealthy clients who later reported identity theft or financial fraud. Deering is definitely connected, Captain Harlow confirmed. When we brought him in for questioning, he lawyered up immediately and hasn't said a word. But his bank records show regular payments from shell companies linked to Victor Mercer. The web was gradually expanding, revealing an operation far more sophisticated and extensive than initially suspected. What had begun as an investigation into one man's crimes had evolved into the dismantling of an international criminal network, specializing in targeted financial predation. Throughout this process, I continued my work with the Foundation, though with modified methods to accommodate security concerns. The proposed legislation was moving forward in committee, with a hearing scheduled for the following month. Dr. Levinson and I refined our research based on the new information, developing a more comprehensive understanding of how organized groups could systematically perpetrate financial exploitation. 6 weeks into the investigation, a significant breakthrough occurred. Victor Mercer, under intensive surveillance by Canadian authorities, traveled to Zurich for what appeared to be a prearranged meeting. Swiss police, coordinating with Interpol, observed him entering a private dining room at an exclusive restaurant. "They've identified the other party," Captain Harlow reported, her voice tense with excitement. "Catherine Reynolds, Mason's sister." "Sister?" I repeated incredulously. "Mason told me he was an only child. I never heard any mention of a sister." According to records we've obtained, Catherine Reynolds is 3 years younger than Mason. They were separated as children after their parents' divorce. Mason stayed with their father, Catherine with their mother. They reconnected as adults. Another family member emerging from the shadows, another layer of deception in the life I thought I had understood. How many Reynolds family members were involved in this operation? How deep did the conspiracy extend? Swiss authorities arrested both Mercer and Catherine Reynolds following their meeting, securing valuable evidence including digital devices and handwritten notes. Catherine's initial interrogation revealed a startling new dimension to the case. "She claims that Mason isn't actually dead," Captain Harlow informed me, her voice carefully neutral. According to her statement, the body in Switzerland was a deliberate misdirection. Someone altered to look like Mason, who died by suicide as part of a prearranged plan. "That's impossible," I objected immediately. "There was dental record, confirmation, DNA testing." "We're investigating her claims thoroughly," Captain Harlow assured me, reviewing all the forensic evidence from the original identification. So far, everything indicates that the body was indeed Mason Reynolds. After weeks of legal stress and emotional turmoil, a night out sounded perfect. "Let's do it," I agreed. "Friday night?" Stephanie grinned. "I'll make the reservation." Friday evening found us both preparing with an almost giddy energy. I chose a red dress I'd bought months ago but never worn, something brighter and more attention-grabbing than my usual understated style. Stephanie borrowed a black jumpsuit from my closet that we'd altered slightly to fit her smaller frame. "We look hot," she declared as we assessed our reflections in my bedroom mirror. "Like divorced women who just took their ex-husbands to the eye cleaners." I laughed. "Is that a specific look?" "It is now," she said, adjusting her statement earrings. "Confident, stylish, and absolutely not devastated by the end of our marriages." "I'll drink to that," I said. The restaurant was buzzing when we arrived, a new hotspot in Williamsburg that had been written up in all the food magazines. The host led us to a prime table near the center of the room, and heads turned as we passed. It felt good to be noticed, to be out in the world as something other than Daniel Hamilton's wife or ex-wife. We ordered cocktails and shared plates of Spanish-inspired tapas, talking and laughing with an ease that still surprised me sometimes. Stephanie and I had formed a friendship that seemed destined to outlast the circumstances that had brought us together. "Have you thought about dating again?" she asked as we finished our second round of drinks. I nearly choked on my sip of gin and tonic. "God, no. I'm nowhere near ready for that." "Really?" She looked genuinely surprised. "You seem so together, so ready to move forward." Moving forward doesn't necessarily mean jumping into another relationship, I pointed out. I spent more than half my adult life with Daniel. I need time to figure out who I am without him. Stephanie nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I just thought, well, you're beautiful, successful, newly wealthy. She grinned. You'd be quite a catch. What about you? I deflected. Any interest in dating? Not yet, she admitted. The thought of trusting another man after Michael seems impossible right now. But someday, maybe. I always wanted children. Her voice trailed off, and I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. You still can have them, you know. There's time. Maybe, she said, her expression turning wistful. Though the idea of doing it alone is daunting. You wouldn't be alone, I assured her. You'd have friends. You'd have me. She smiled. That means a lot, Elena. Really. As we were finishing our meal, Stephanie suddenly stiffened, her eyes fixed on something over my shoulder. Don't look now, she said in a low voice. But the Hamilton brothers just walked in. Of course they had. The universe couldn't resist. One last cosmic joke at our expense. Are they alone? I asked, resisting the urge to turn around. No, Stephanie said, her expression darkening. They're with two women. Young, blonde, probably legal associates from their firm. Of course they are, I sighed. Should we leave? Stephanie straightened her shoulders. Absolutely not. We were here first, we look amazing, and we just took them both to the cleaners. If anyone should leave, it's them. She was right. I refused. To slink away as if I had something to be ashamed of. Okay then. We stay, we finish our dinner, and we ignore them completely. Perfect plan, she agreed. Except, oh damn, they've seen us. They're coming over. I took a deep breath and turned to see Daniel and Michael approaching our table, accompanied by two attractive women who looked to be in their late 20s. Exactly as Stephanie had described. Elena, Daniel said, stopping beside our table. Stephanie, what a surprise. Is it? I asked coolly. This restaurant was just featured in New York Magazine. Hardly an obscure choice. Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable. True. It's good to see you both. Michael stood slightly behind his brother, avoiding direct eye contact with Stephanie. The two young women hovered awkwardly in the background, clearly uncertain about the tension-filled encounter they'd stumbled into. How are you? Daniel asked, his tone painfully polite. Never better, Stephanie answered before I could. The revised settlement agreements have really lifted our spirits. She smiled sweetly. How about you boys? Enjoying what's left of your fortunes? Michael flushed, but Daniel maintained his composure. We're fine, thank you. He gestured vaguely toward his companions. We should let you enjoy your dinner. We just wanted to say hello. Hi. Bye, Stephanie said, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. As they walked away, I couldn't help but admire Stephanie's backbone. The timid legal assistant who'd once been intimidated by the Hamilton family was gone, replaced by a woman who refused to be dismissed or overlooked. That felt good, she said once they were out of earshot. Did you see Michael's face when I mentioned the settlements? I nodded, smiling despite the awkwardness of the encounter. I think you've officially graduated from Hamilton ex-wife school, with honors. We finished our dinner without further incident, though I was acutely aware of Daniel and his group at a table across the restaurant. Occasionally I felt his gaze on me, but I refused to look in his direction again. As we were leaving, Stephanie linked her arm through mine. Let's take the long way out, she suggested. Right past their table. You're evil, I said, but I was smiling. Let's do it. We walked through the restaurant with heads high, making no effort to acknowledge the Hamilton brothers as we passed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Daniel watching us leave, his expression unreadable. Outside, The November air was crisp and invigorating. We decided to walk a few blocks before calling a car, both of us buzzing with the strange energy of the encounter. "Do you ever miss him?" Stephanie asked suddenly. "Daniel, I mean. Despite everything." The question caught me off guard with its directness. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not the man he became, but the man I thought he was. The one I fell in love with in law school, who wanted to change the world." I shrugged. "But that man hasn't existed for a long time, if he ever did." "I understand that," she said quietly. "The Michael I married seemed so different from his family. More idealistic, less materially focused. Or maybe that was just the act he put on to win me over." "They're good at becoming whatever they think you want," I said. "It's part of their charm, and what makes the betrayal so painful when the mask finally slips." We walked in thoughtful, silence for a block before Stephanie spoke again. "I'm glad we found each other in all this mess," she said. "I don't think I could have gotten through these past weeks alone." "Me too," I said, and meant it. Amid all the pain and betrayal, this unexpected friendship had been a gift, a reminder that endings could also be beginnings, that loss could create space for new connections. When we returned to the brownstone, I checked my phone to find a text from Daniel sent an hour earlier. "You looked happy tonight." "I'm glad." I showed the message to Stephanie. "What do you think? Is he being sincere, or trying to insinuate himself back into my good graces now that the legal battle is over?" She considered the question. "Maybe a bit of both? The Hamilton? Men are masters of ambiguity." "True enough," I agreed, setting my phone aside without responding. Daniel's opinion of my happiness no longer mattered. What mattered was that I actually was happy, tentatively, cautiously happy in a way I hadn't been in years. As November progressed, Stephanie's new apartment was finally ready. The day she moved in, I helped her arrange furniture and hang artwork, turning the sleek one-bedroom into a space that reflected her emerging sense of self. "It's small," she said as we stood in the center of the living room, admiring our work. "But it's mine. All mine." "It's perfect," I assured her. "And remember, this is just the beginning. You can always move somewhere larger once you figure out exactly what you want." That evening, we sat on her new sofa with takeout containers spread across her coffee table, celebrating her first night in her own place. "I'm going to miss having you at the brownstone," I admitted. It was nice, not coming home to an empty house every night. "You could get a roommate," she suggested teasingly. "Or a cat." I laughed. A cat might be more my speed right now, less complicated than people. "You won't get lonely?" she asked, her expression turning serious. "I might," I acknowledged. "But I think I need some time truly alone, to get comfortable with my own company again." After dinner, as I prepared to leave, Stephanie hugged me tightly. "This isn't goodbye, you know. We still have Italy to plan. And I expect regular dinner dates in the meantime." "Absolutely," I promised.